By the time Lauren Hayes asked if he would ever date a single mom, Marcus Cole had already spent 47 minutes caring about her door. That was the part that should have warned him. A hollow core slab in a corridor that smelled like wet carpet and someone's leftover pad thai, the kind of door landlords ordered in bulk from a warehouse catalog, 3/4-inch particle board dressed up to look like wood. But when a man spends his life fixing what other people ignore, he starts reading damage the way a radiologist reads film. A loose hinge whispers neglect. A cheap lock confesses budget. And a frame splintered inward at shoulder height, fibers torn toward the apartment instead of away, tells a story no tenant should ever have to live inside. And the hallway outside 3C hummed with a dying fluorescent tube and the faint bass of someone's television 2 floors down. A cartoon sticker clung to the exit sign, peeling at one corner, grinning at nobody. The whole floor felt like it was trying to be cheerful on 4 hours of sleep. Marcus set his tool bag on the mat, positioned his feet shoulder-width apart out of habit, and knocked once. Not loud. Firm. The difference mattered. Inside, soft feet padded across a floor. Paused. Then the faint clink of a chain sliding free of its latch. The deadbolt turned. The door opened 3 inches. No more. One brown eye looked through the gap, calm and sharp, and reading him the way he might inspect drywall for water stains, searching for the crack before committing to the wall. "Can I help you?" Low voice, level, no tremor. Marcus held the work order where she could see the name and unit number. Marcus Cole, building maintenance. Your lock's been sticking, and your frame took a hit. Her eye dropped to the paper, then to his tool bag, then climbed back to his face. She used those seconds the way a nurse uses a stethoscope, listening for what the patient won't say out loud. "You got ID?" He pulled his badge from his shirt pocket and held it in the gap. She studied it longer than anyone in the building ever had, 7 full seconds, and only when she was satisfied did the door widen. The chain stayed on. Marcus did not push it. "Sorry, I do this with everyone now." "No reason to be sorry. You're doing it right." The chain clicked off. She stepped back into the light of her own apartment and let him see what she had made of 400 square feet and not enough money. The couch faced the window instead of the television, a blue blanket folded with military precision over its back, a row of tiny shoes lined up beside the mat, 2 sizes at least, smallest pair scuffed at the toes from running. A pink backpack hung on a hook near the kitchen, unicorn patch half peeled, glitter shedding onto the linoleum. The only real mess was a scatter of crayons across the coffee table and a coloring book open to a half-finished cartoon fox missing most of its fur. Lauren Hayes, 30 years old, though her eyes carried the mileage of someone who had crossed 40 on foot. She leaned a hip against the counter and wrapped her arms around herself like the room was cold. Even though the thermostat read 71, Marcus had seen that posture before. It was not about temperature, it was about perimeter. He crouched beside the frame and ran his thumb along the damage. Cheap softwood, the kind a fingernail could scar. The crack ran at shoulder height, splintered inward, and the factory strike plate had been ripped half out of its seat. The screws, 3/4-inch zinc, had pulled through the particle board like thread through wet paper. "Someone put weight on this door. Last week, my ex. He's not on the lease. I told him he can't just show up anymore. He didn't appreciate the update." She said it the way a weather anchor reads a weekend forecast. Just facts, barometric pressure, no drama. Marcus recognized that voice too. It belonged to women who had learned that showing emotion around the wrong man turned emotion into ammunition. You call the police? I did. They came after he left. Told me to get the lock looked at and keep the chain on and call again if he comes back. Her mouth twisted on that last phrase, a tiny spasm of knowledge that both of them shared without saying it aloud. Call again. As if repetition were a form of protection. Marcus nodded once and opened his bag. Drill, chisel, 3-inch deck screws rated for outdoor framing, and a solid reinforced strike plate he had bought himself for $12, because Matt would never approve the expense. You cannot change a woman's whole life with a door, but you can make it harder for trouble to walk in without announcing itself. He set the chisel against the crushed wood and began tapping. Each stroke of the hammer knocked loose soft fibers and sent a sharp, rhythmic report through the quiet room. Lauren moved around the kitchen while he worked, not hovering, not retreating, holding a position where she could see both him and the door at all times. When she poured coffee into a chipped blue mug and held the pot toward him, he said black was fine, and she set a second mug on the counter near his elbow. The smell cut through the sawdust, warm and real. Cinnamon, a thread of vanilla, something that made the apartment feel like it was trying very hard to be a home and mostly succeeding. He carved out the ruined particle board and slid a strip of white oak into the hollow, narrow as his thumb, but 4 times harder than anything the factory had provided. When he tapped it home, the pine frame seemed to sigh around it, grateful for something solid to lean on. What's that? Lauren had been watching his hands the way she had watched his badge, measuring competence, not flirting. Hardwood shim. The old screws were biting into particle dust and drywall mud. First serious hit, and they ripped right out. This gives the lock something real to hold. So you're giving my door a backbone. Something like that. He swapped the factory screws for 3-inch monsters that reached through the shim, through the frame, and into the structural stud behind the wall. Each one pulled the strike plate flush against oak. The drill whined, settled, and went quiet as metal met wood and held. When the work was done, he closed the door, tested the bolt, then hit the frame with his shoulder. Not theatrical, just honest weight, and the kind a man in a temper might throw if he thought size was enough to win. The frame did not flex. The bolt did not jump. The wall absorbed the force the way a foundation absorbs rain, quietly and completely. Try it. Lauren crossed the room, turned the knob, closed the door, and threw the deadbolt. The click that answered was firm and clean, a sound with confidence in it. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches, a release she probably did not know she was performing. It feels different. If someone hits this door now, they're hitting the stud wall. Not trim, not particle board. Wall. She looked at the frame like she was seeing something beyond lumber and hardware. Thank you. If your ex shows up again and tries it, call the police first, then call me. Or I want to see how my work holds under real pressure. The corner of her mouth lifted for half a second, then fell. You say that like it's a science experiment. In a way it is. Pressure is the only test that separates what was built right from what was just pretending to be solid. Her eyes held his for a beat longer than maintenance required. Then she stepped back, and the moment settled into the ordinary hum of a Wednesday afternoon. Marcus packed his tools slowly, wiped the sawdust from the mat, and left his card on the counter. The one with his cell number and the name of the small custom furniture side business that kept Zoe in shoes and cereal. but the work order nagged him all the way down the stairs. He had pulled it from the system that morning, and the timestamp read January 9th, 4 months and 11 days ago. Sloran had filed the request in winter, and now dogwoods were blooming outside the laundromat across the street. He checked the log when he reached his basement workshop. Her ticket had been opened, marked resolved, and closed 3 separate times, each closure stamped with the same administrative login. He ran the ID against the building's access list. Tyler Harrington, Regional Property Manager for Harrington Development Group. The landlord's boss's son, the man with master keys to every unit in 6 buildings, and the authority to bury a maintenance request so deep it would never see a wrench. Marcus pulled the filter wider. All work orders, all 6 properties, all 6 years of digital records Matt had never bothered to audit. The screen filled slowly, line after line, a glacier of neglect revealed in timestamps and status codes. 73 tickets closed without completion, 89% filed by tenants who were Black, Latino, elderly immigrants, or single mothers. Average response time for white tenants across the portfolio, 2.3 days. For everyone else, 14.7, if the ticket survived at all. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the numbers until they stopped looking like a spreadsheet and started looking like a blueprint. Not of a building, but of a system designed to make certain people feel so small they would never complain loud enough to matter. On the wall above his workbench, a framed photograph of Sarah holding 3-year-old Zoe caught the last of the basement light. Beside it, his ICC certification and contractor's license gathered dust in matching frames, or relics of a career that had been surgically removed from every bidding list in the city 3 years ago for the crime of telling the truth about load-bearing lumber. He closed the laptop and climbed the stairs to his apartment. Zoe sat cross-legged on the couch, tongue pinched between her teeth, pressing a popsicle stick against the midsection of a bridge that leaned slightly to the left. Her science fair project, 3 weeks in the making, ambitious and fragile in the way that only a 7-year-old's engineering can be. But beside the bridge lay an envelope from Lincoln Elementary, already opened because Zoe had not yet learned that some mail should wait. Marcus read it standing up. A parent conference request. Zoe had shoved a classmate during recess. Just the classmate had told her that her father was just a janitor who lived in a basement, and Zoe's hands had answered before her vocabulary could. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes and a jaw set in the exact angle Sarah used to wear when she was trying not to cry. "Daddy, why do they say you don't matter?" Marcus sat beside her. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a fury so controlled it had nowhere to go except into the steadiness of his voice. "I matter, Zoe, and I'm going to prove it. Not with fists, with the truth." She leaned into his side. He put his arm around her and stared at the wall where Sarah's photograph watched them both with the gentle, unblinking patience of someone who had always known this day would come. What Marcus did not know, as he held his daughter and felt the slow, structural shift of a man deciding to stop surviving and start building, was that 6 miles away. In a glass office on the 22nd floor, Tyler Harrington had already picked up the phone, not to call Lauren, to call the family's attorney. The target was not the woman who had left him or the daughter he claimed to miss at volumes designed to rattle door frames. The target was the maintenance man who had just made his lock irrelevant and his data visible. The first letter would arrive in 72 hours. By then, Marcus Cole would be ready for it. But tonight, he held Zoe, and the bridge between them leaned a little to the left, And neither of them fixed it yet. Because some things need to be crooked before you understand where the weight really falls. And the principal's office at Lincoln Elementary smelled like laminated paper and institutional calm. Mrs. Chen sat behind a desk crowded with framed commendations and a ceramic apple that had lost its stem, her reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose, her expression the careful neutrality of a woman who had mediated 600 parent conferences and learned that the first person to raise their voice always lost the room. Marcus sat across from her, with his work boots still carrying basement dust and his spine as straight as a load-bearing column. Zoe waited in the hallway with a guidance counselor and a juice box she had not touched. "Mr. Cole," Zoe struck a classmate during recess. "We have a zero-tolerance policy on physical aggression, regardless of provocation." "I understand the policy. What I need to understand is whether you have a matching policy for when a child tells my daughter that her father is a janitor who lives in a basement and that makes her less than everyone else in this school." Mrs. Chen removed her glasses and set them on the desk, a gesture that bought her 3 seconds of silence. Children repeat things. It doesn't always reflect. It always reflects. A 7-year-old doesn't invent class hierarchy over a juice box. She imported it from a dinner table. The question isn't whether Zoe pushed someone. The question is what that someone was already pushing on her every day she walked through your doors. The ceramic apple sat between them like a small, silent referee. Mrs. Chen's fingers found its base and turned it 1 full rotation before she answered. "I'll speak with both families. And I'll ask our counselor to check in with Zoe weekly." "Thank you. And for the record, I'm not raising a child who hits. But I'm also not raising one who absorbs cruelty and calls it manners." He collected Zoe from the hallway. She took his hand with the fierce grip of someone who had spent 2 hours believing she might be in trouble forever, and they walked to the bus stop in a silence that felt less like punishment and more like a ceasefire. At the corner, she looked up with a question she had been constructing since recess. "Daddy, are you going to fix it, like you fix things?" "Yeah, baby. But this one takes longer than a door." She nodded with the grave acceptance of a child who understands time as a unit of trust rather than minutes, and climbed the bus steps without looking back. Marcus watched the yellow doors fold shut and felt something settle behind his ribs, heavy and directional, the way a compass needle settles when it finally finds north. 6 miles east, in a corner office where the glass was thick enough to muffle traffic and the carpet deep enough to swallow footsteps, Tyler Harrington dropped a printed spreadsheet onto Sandra Mills's desk hard enough to scatter her paper clips. Who authorized maintenance access to the digital ticketing system? Sandra gathered the paper clips with the slow precision of a woman who had survived 12 years of Harringtons by never moving faster than the situation required. Matt Calloway, the on-site manager. He gave Cole the admin login so he could receive work orders on his phone. "Revoke it, today, and pull the audit trail. I want to know every screen that man opened." "Tyler." Sandra closed her laptop as if sealing a chamber. If Cole already downloaded the response time data, revoking access after the fact doesn't erase what he's seen. It confirms that we know it's a problem. It's not a problem. It's a staffing lag. Properties this old have maintenance backlogs. Sandra opened a manila folder she kept in the second drawer, the one with the lock, the one Tyler had never asked about because he assumed HR directors filled their drawers with onboarding paperwork and birthday card sign-up sheets. Inside, 12 formal complaints from tenants across 4 properties, each stamped received, each annotated in Sandra's handwriting with a date and a disposition. Investigated, no action. Investigated, no action. 12 times in 24 months, in the same 2 words, turning a pattern into a policy. If someone files a FOIA request on the HUD subsidized units, these surface in 72 hours. Tyler leaned over the desk until his shadow covered the folder. Nobody in those buildings has a lawyer. They've got $800 rent and a fear of eviction. That's the moat, Sandra. It's held for 6 years. Moats work until someone builds a bridge. He straightened and turned toward the window, where the skyline offered the kind of reassurance that only altitude can provide. And if Lauren thinks she can weaponize some handyman with a socket wrench against this family, she's overestimating him and underestimating me. Sandra closed the folder and returned it to the locked drawer. She did not tell Tyler that she had begun making copies of every document inside it. She did not tell him that the copies lived in a safe deposit box at a credit union on Elm Street, 14 blocks from the nearest Harrington property. Some bridges are built in silence. 3 evenings after the principal's office, Rosa Gutierrez knocked on Marcus's basement door carrying a hardcover notebook with a cracked spine and a rubber band holding it shut. She was 67, retired from 34 years of surgical nursing at Mercy General, and she still had the handwriting of someone trained to chart vitals in a moving ambulance, precise, dated, and legible at arm's length. 3 years, mijo. Every time he showed up, I wrote it down. Date, time, duration, noise level, whether she screamed, whether the child cried, whether anyone called the police, and how long they took to arrive. Marcus opened the notebook to a random page. November 14th, 2 years prior. 11:47 p.m. male voice, elevated, struck door twice. Child audible crying approximately 2 minutes. No patrol response. Tenant did not call. Below, in smaller script, I called. Dispatch said no crime in progress. 47 entries spanning 36 months. A calendar of siege written in a retired nurse's impeccable cursive. Rosa, why didn't you report this to management? She gave him a look that belonged in a museum of patience. I reported to Matt. Twice. He said it was a domestic matter and told me to stop calling the office after 9 p.m. Marcus photographed every page with his phone camera. When he reached the last entry, dated 6 days ago, the ink was still dark enough to smell. Male subject returned 2:13 a.m. New hardware on door held. Maintenance worker from 1A intervened. Police arrived 9 minutes after call. Subject left on foot. He looked up. Rosa stood with her arms crossed and her chin lifted at the angle of a woman who had waited 3 years for someone to take her notebook seriously. This is evidence, Rosa. Dated, specific, corroborated by police dispatch logs. I know what evidence looks like. I charted for surgeons who testified in malpractice cases. You think I kept a diary for fun? He almost smiled. Almost. Over the next 11 days, Marcus worked in 2 directions simultaneously. During the day, he completed legitimate maintenance across the 6 Harrington properties, replacing washers and resetting breakers and cataloging, with the quiet discipline of a building inspector on overtime, every code violation his trained eye could identify. At night, in Lauren's kitchen over mugs of cinnamon coffee while Emma slept and the wall clock ticked its indifferent rhythm, he and Lauren disassembled the architecture of the company that had once employed her and now imprisoned them both. Lauren drew organizational charts on the backs of Emma's construction paper, green crayon for money flow, red for authority, blue for the gaps where accountability should have lived and didn't. She had managed a $14 million development budget before Tyler made staying employed contingent on staying silent. She knew where the numbers bent. Maintenance allocation last fiscal year across all 6 buildings, $340,000, approved by Margaret Harrington personally. Actual spend verified through vendor invoices, $187,000. The gap, $153,000, routed back through a subsidiary called Harrington Services LLC. Tyler is the sole signatory. Where does the subsidiary spend it? It doesn't. It holds. The account has been growing for 4 years. My estimate is north of $600,000 sitting in a shell entity that exists on paper to service buildings it has never sent a single contractor to visit. Marcus added this to the file he was building in a waterproof document box he kept behind the table saw. The box now contained Rose's notebook photocopies, Lauren's financial analysis, time-stamped photographs of 112 code violations across 4 properties, the complete work order database exported to a thumb drive before Tyler killed his access, and his own annotated report cross-referencing response times by tenant demographics with the methodical precision of a man who had once delivered building inspection testimony in federal court, and understood that judges trust numbers only when the person presenting them can explain every decimal. On the 12th day, he drove to the Elm Street property and found what he had been afraid he would find: 14 fire suppression sprinkler heads in the North Corridor, serving 23 apartments and 41 residents, including 9 children, had been painted over during a cosmetic renovation 2 years earlier. Paint sealed the deflectors shut. In a fire, those heads would hold their water like clenched fists while the hallway filled with smoke and heat and the screaming that follows both. NFPA 13, Section 8.17.4, Maintenance and Obstruction Requirements. Violations so severe it carried mandatory abatement. At the Oak Street building, the 3rd-floor stairwell railing flexed under his hand like a green branch. He clipped a fish scale to the top rail and pulled. It yielded at 140 pounds, 60 pounds below the IRCR 312.1 minimum. A stumbling adult or a running child could send that railing into open air and the person with it. At Pine, the CO2 exhaust ventilation in 4 units had been offline for 8 months. 3 of those units housed families with children under 5. Was the demographic most vulnerable to carbon dioxide accumulation in sealed apartments during winter heating cycles. IMC Section 401.2, General Ventilation Requirements. The kind of violation that does not announce itself with a bang, but with a slow, quiet poisoning that parents mistake for seasonal flu until a pediatrician orders blood work and finds numbers that belong in a garage, not a nursery. Marcus documented everything with photographs geotagged by his phone, measurements recorded on standardized inspection forms he printed from the ICC database, and narrative descriptions written in the flat, specific language of a man who had passed every certification exam the International Code Council offered for residential construction because Sarah had once told him that credentials were the difference between a complaint and a case. And the letters arrived on a Tuesday. 3 envelopes, 3 different senders, 1 architect. The first from Harrington Development Group's legal department, termination of his maintenance contract, effective in 72 hours, citing unauthorized access to proprietary data systems. The second from the law offices of Whitfield, Sloan & Greer, representing Tyler Harrington, a petition for full custody of Emma Hayes, alleging unsafe living conditions in apartment 3C based on, of all things, a building inspection report that Tyler himself had commissioned from a firm that owed the Harringtons $4 million in outstanding receivables. The third from the City Licensing Board, A formal review of Marcus's ICC certification initiated by an anonymous complaint alleging falsified continuing education credits. And the review would freeze his ability to bid on any construction project in the state until resolved, a process that averaged 14 months. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed and held the 3 letters in a fan, like a hand of cards dealt by someone who believed the game was already won. For the first time since Sarah's diagnosis, he felt the specific gravity of powerlessness, the sensation that every door in every direction had been locked by someone with more keys than he would ever own. Then Zoe appeared in the doorway with her bridge model cradled in both hands. The diagonal brace in the center section snapped cleanly where she had warned him it was weak on the morning this all began. "Daddy, I tried glue, but it won't hold. The angle is wrong." He looked at the brake. The popsicle stick had sheared along the grain because the joint lacked mechanical reinforcement, a problem glue could never solve because glue only works when the underlying structure is sound. "Glue doesn't carry load, baby. You need a bolt. Small one, right through both pieces. Come on, I'll show you." They sat together at the kitchen table with a pin vise and the smallest machine screw in his toolbox, and while Zoe held the joint steady and he drilled a hole no wider than a pencil lead, the tremor in his hands stopped. Not because the fear left, because the work was specific, and his hands remembered that specificity is the antidote to panic. A man is never smaller than the problem he's solving. He's only smaller when he stops solving it. The bridge held. Zoe tested it by pressing down on the center span with her thumb, hard enough that her nail went white. The bolted joint did not move. She grinned the gap-toothed grin that contained every reason Marcus had ever needed to stay upright, and carried the model back to her room like a trophy. Marcus returned to the 3 letters. He read them again, slowly, the way he read inspection reports, looking not for what they said, but for what they revealed about the person who wrote them. Tyler had thrown termination, custody, and licensure in a single volley, the legal equivalent of hitting a door with both hands, maximum noise, maximum intimidation, designed to make a man flinch and fold. But Marcus had spent 15 years reading the language of force applied to structures, and what the letters told him was that Tyler was afraid. Afraid men do not file custody petitions at midnight. Where afraid men do not trigger licensing reviews over anonymous complaints. Afraid men do not use 3 weapons when 1 would suffice. 3 letters meant 3 points of failure. Tyler was trying to seal before the pressure found them. He opened his phone and typed a name into the search bar he had been avoiding for a week. Denise Carter, civil rights attorney. Exposed a redlining scheme in the Eastern District 7 years ago that resulted in a $14 million settlement. Currently in private practice, accepting cases on contingency for clients who could not afford retainers. Office on Grand Avenue, 16 blocks south. He called at 8:47 p.m. She answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded like it had been waiting for this particular phone call for 4 years. As her office occupied the second floor of a converted brownstone that smelled like old books and fresh printer toner. The desk was buried under case files, but the chair across from it was clear, as if she kept it empty on principle. She listened to Marcus for 41 uninterrupted minutes while he laid out the work order data, Rosa's notebook, Lauren's financial charts, the code violations, and the 3 letters. When he finished, she removed her glasses and set them on the 1 square inch of desk not covered by paper. You have work order data showing racial disparity in maintenance response across 6 properties over 6 years. You have a corroborating witness log spanning 3 years. You have a financial trail showing $153,000 diverted from maintenance into a shell entity. You have 112 code violations documented to federal inspection standards, and 3 of those 6 buildings receive HUD subsidies under the Fair Housing Act. She leaned forward. Mr. Cole, do you know what happens when a HUD-subsidized property owner systematically denies maintenance to tenants based on race? It stops being a civil matter. It becomes a federal case. 42 U.S.C. Section 3604, Discriminatory Terms and Conditions. Section 3631, Interference with federally protected housing activities. Criminal penalties up to $100,000 and 10 years per count. This is the largest potential fair housing violation in this state in 18 years, and you assembled the evidence while changing light bulbs. Marcus did not smile. I also changed the locks. Denise opened a fresh legal pad and clicked her pen. I need to ask you something, and I need the honest answer, not the brave one. Tyler Harrington just hit you with termination, a custody threat against your partner, and a licensing freeze. That's a coordinated strike designed to make you disappear. If you proceed, he will escalate. His family has 4 attorneys on retainer and a PR firm that's cleaned up worse. Are you prepared for what comes next? Marcus thought about the bridge on Zoe's desk, the bolted joint that held under her thumb. He thought about the oak shim in Lauren's doorframe that had absorbed a grown man's fist without cracking. He thought about 73 work orders closed by a man who believed that the people on the other side of those doors would never find anyone willing to open the file. I've been preparing for this since the day they erased my name from every contractor list in the city. I just didn't have the evidence yet. Now I do. Denise wrote his name at the top of the legal pad in capital letters and drew a single line beneath it, the way a foundation is marked before the first beam is set. Then we build. The night before the meeting, Marcus would later remember as the hinge point of his life. He sat at Lauren's kitchen table with Denise on speakerphone and Rosa in the chair beside him, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the indexed binder for the 3rd time. Lauren stood at the counter with 2 mugs of coffee she had not yet poured because her hands were shaking and she did not want anyone to see. You scared? Her voice aimed at Marcus, but reaching everyone. Yes, but I'm more afraid of what these buildings look like in 5 years if nobody opens this file. Rosa closed the binder and laid her palm flat on its cover the way a witness lays a hand on a Bible. Mijo, I am 67 years old. I wrote in that notebook for 3 years because I believed someone would come along who understood what the words meant. Do not let an old woman be wrong. Denise's voice came through the phone speaker with the precise warmth of someone who had learned to combine urgency and calm the way a surgeon combines speed and gentleness. Everything is filed. DOJ has the preliminary packet. It's the meeting tomorrow is a courtesy notification to Harrington Group before the federal investigation goes public. Marcus, your testimony is the keystone. Without it, this is data. With it, it's a case. Marcus looked at Lauren. She had stopped shaking. The mugs were full now, steam rising in twin columns. She set one beside his hand without brushing his fingers this time, a gesture of precision rather than accident, placing the warmth exactly where he needed it. 6 months ago, you walked into my apartment and gave my door a backbone, she said quietly, a tired smile ghosting her mouth. Tomorrow, you do the same thing for 73 families. He held her gaze across the steam. It's the same skill set, just a bigger frame. Later, And when Denise had hung up and Rosa had returned to 3B, and the building had settled into its midnight vocabulary of pipe ticks and stairwell sighs, Marcus stood alone in the hallway outside Lauren's door. He rested his hand against the frame, felt the oak shim solid beneath the paint, ran his thumb across the heads of the 3-inch screws that sat flush and true. The door had held when it was tested. Tomorrow he would find out if he could do the same. The conference room on the 22nd floor had been designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 walls, a table cut from a single slab of black walnut that cost more than Marcus earned in a year, and 8 leather chairs arranged so that whoever sat at the head could see the city below and feel, for the duration of any meeting, that they owned a meaningful portion of it. So Margaret Harrington occupied that chair. 74 years old, silver hair cut close, posture that suggested she had never in her life leaned against anything for support. To her left, Tyler, jaw tight, wearing the expression of a man who had been told to sit down and had not yet forgiven the instruction. Beside him, Sandra Mills, hands folded over a leather portfolio she had not opened. 2 attorneys from Whitfield, Sloan and Greer flanked the far end, yellow legal pads already half filled with notes written before anyone else arrived. Marcus entered wearing the gray suit Sarah had picked out for his ICC certification ceremony 9 years ago. It still fit. Denise Carter walked a half step behind him, briefcase in one hand, the kind of calm on her face that comes from having prepared so thoroughly that surprise is no longer a category. What's behind them both, a man neither the Harringtons nor their attorneys had expected. Special Agent James Park, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, badge clipped to his belt, and a file folder under his arm that contained the reason this meeting would not end the way Tyler had planned. Marcus set the binder on the walnut table. 247 pages, indexed with colored tabs, each section numbered in the margin with the notation style he had learned from Sarah's oncologist, who had once told him that the difference between an opinion and a diagnosis is documentation. He opened to the first tab without sitting down. Harrington Development Group manages 847 units across 6 properties. Over the past 6 years, 73 maintenance requests were closed in your ticketing system without any work being performed. Every closure carries the same administrative login. He turned the binder so the table could read the screen captures. That login belongs to Tyler Harrington. The affected tenants are 89% Black, Latino, elderly, or single mothers. Average response time for white tenants across your portfolio, 2.3 days. For everyone else, 14.7. Those aren't staffing lags. Staffing lags don't sort by skin color. Tyler's chair scraped the floor as he leaned forward. This is a disgruntled employee with a spreadsheet. It doesn't prove... I wasn't finished. Marcus did not raise his voice. He turned to the second tab. Photographs filled the page in grid formation, each one geotagged, time-stamped, and annotated with the applicable code section. 14 fire suppression heads at your Elm Street property painted shut during a cosmetic renovation you approved 26 months ago. NFPA 13, Section 8.17.4. 41 residents, 9 children, 0 functional suppression in the North Corridor. At Oak Street, your stairwell railing fails at 140 pounds, 60 below the IRC minimum. At Pine, 4 units have had no CO2 exhaust ventilation for 8 months. 3 of those units house children under 5. The attorneys stopped writing. Sandra Mills opened her portfolio for the first time and removed a single sheet of paper, which she slid across the table to Margaret without looking at Tyler. Margaret glanced down. The color left her face in stages. like paint thinning under solvent. Marcus opened the third tab. Your approved maintenance budget last fiscal year was $340,000. Verified vendor payments total $187,000. The remaining $153,000 was routed into Harrington Services LLC, a subsidiary with one signatory. He did not need to say the name. Everyone at the table turned toward Tyler with the synchronized motion of witnesses who had just heard a load-bearing wall crack. Agent Park stepped forward and placed his badge flat on the walnut surface, gold catching the overhead light. Mrs. Harrington, the Department of Justice opened a preliminary investigation 2 weeks ago based on evidence Mr. Cole provided through counsel. 3 of your 6 properties receive HUD subsidies under the Fair Housing Act. Discriminatory maintenance practices in federally subsidized housing trigger criminal jurisdiction under 42 U.S.C. sections 3604 and 3631. This meeting serves as formal notification that the investigation is now active. Tyler stood so fast his chair rolled into the glass wall behind him. Mother, do not say a word. Call Whitfield. Margaret did not look at her son. Her eyes stayed on Marcus with the fixed intensity of someone recalculating 30 years of assumptions in real time. Mr. Cole, you worked for us once. I did. Your son removed me from every bidding list in this city because I reported substandard framing lumber on a $2.7 million project your construction subsidiary was cutting corners on. That was 3 years ago. I've been changing your light bulbs ever since. I wasn't aware of that. You signed the maintenance budgets every year, Mrs. Harrington. Awareness is a choice you made in one direction and refused to make in the other. The sentence landed in the room the way a final nail sets into hardwood, flush and permanent, and no one at the table attempted to pull it back out. The consequences arrived faster than anyone predicted because federal machinery, once engaged, does not observe the courtesies of corporate timelines. Tyler was suspended from all operational roles within 48 hours. The custody petition against Lauren collapsed on its own weight when Judge Patricia Owens reviewed the filing, noted the concurrent federal investigation and the 2-year restraining order Rosa's notebook had helped secure, and issued a 3-sentence ruling that ended with language the family attorneys would remember for years. This court does not award custody to a petitioner whose documented behavior is the primary source of the instability he alleges. Sandra Mills resigned on the 3rd day and entered a cooperation agreement with the DOJ. Her locked drawer, the safe deposit box on Elm Street, 12 complaints annotated in her own handwriting. They became the backbone of the evidentiary timeline, proof that the institution had known and chosen silence over correction. In exchange for full testimony, the department declined to prosecute her. She moved to a nonprofit housing agency in another state and never spoke Tyler Harrington's name again. Margaret Harrington appeared before the press once. She stood behind a podium without notes and said 11 words that the evening news replayed in every market in the state. I am responsible for what happened under my name. We will repair. Behind the statement, a $2.1 million emergency remediation fund, every code violation across all 6 properties to be abated within 90 days, and an independent compliance monitor appointed by the court to oversee maintenance operations for 5 years. Matt Calloway paid a $40,000 fine for failure to supervise and lost his property management license. He sold the Maple Street building to a community land trust that offered Marcus the maintenance contract at 3 times his previous rate. Though he declined the salary increase and asked instead for a clause guaranteeing 24-hour response times for all tenants regardless of unit number, income level, or the color of the hand that signed the lease. The DOJ investigation expanded. 4 additional property management firms in the state received subpoenas based on patterns the Harrington data had illuminated. 73 families across the original 6 buildings received compensation from a federal settlement fund, averaging $8,200 per household, a number too small to undo years of leaking pipes and jammed locks and ignored pleas, but large enough to say, in the only language institutions understand, that what happened to them had been measured and found wrong. The city council passed an ordinance requiring any property owner receiving federal housing subsidies to publish quarterly maintenance response data disaggregated by tenant demographics. The press called it the Cole Rule. Marcus did not attend the vote. He sent a 400-word letter to the local paper that Denise helped him edit and Rosa proofread twice. The final line read, "I am not a hero. I am a carpenter. I fix what is broken. Sometimes what is broken is an entire system, and the only tool that works is the truth." 6 months after the conference room on the 22nd floor, on a Sunday morning in October when the air carried the first honest chill of autumn, Marcus stood in the kitchen of apartment 3C making pancakes on a griddle Lauren had bought at a yard sale for $4. The apartment looked different now. Shelves he had built from reclaimed oak lined the wall beside the window, each bracket sanded smooth, no splinters, corners rounded for small hands. On the top shelf, Lauren's project management textbooks, dusted off for the first time in 3 years. On the middle shelf, Emma's chapter books and Zoe's collection of rocks sorted by color. On the bottom shelf, in a wooden box with compartments burned with labels in Marcus's handwriting, crayons and tiny toys, and important rocks, the inventory of 2 childhoods merging at the seams. Zoe's bridge had won 2nd place at the science fair. She maintained, with the iron certainty of a 7-year-old who understood structural engineering better than most adults, that 1st place was fraudulent because the winner used hot glue, which she considered a moral failure equivalent to bribery. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway in fuzzy socks, dragging her bear by one arm. "Mom says you're her person now, not just door friend." Marcus flipped a pancake and kept his voice level. "Is that okay with you?" She thought about it with a seriousness that deserved respect. "You still check the door every time you come in." "Every time." "Then it's okay." Lauren leaned against the counter, mug in both hands, cinnamon steam rising between them. Their eyes met across the small kitchen and held, carrying the kind of knowledge that only accumulates between people who have been afraid together and come out the other side still willing to build. "You know what day it is?" Her voice soft, almost shy, a tone that would have been unimaginable in the woman who had checked his badge for 7 seconds through a 3-inch gap. "My 6 months since I fixed your door. 6 months since you gave it a backbone and then gave one to 73 families and a federal investigation." He set the spatula down. "I just followed the code, the building code and the other kind." She smiled. "Real life isn't about finding perfect materials. It's about choosing the ones that have already been tested and deciding to build with them anyway." Marcus looked at her, at Emma negotiating rock classification policy with Zoe in the living room, at the shelves that held 2 lives folding into one, at the front door with its oak-reinforced frame and 3-inch screws, and a deadbolt that still caught clean and firm every time it closed. He had come to this building with $62 and a daughter and a name that had been scraped off every list that mattered. He was leaving it, not as a hero, not as a symbol, but as a man who had answered every question put to him with the only currency he trusted, the work of his hands and the honesty of his word. When the right person turns to you in the middle of all that and asks, "Would you ever date a single mom?" you get to look around at the life you are standing in, the pancakes and the fuzzy socks and the important rocks and the door that held and answer with your whole chest. I already am.